beauty of Port City is that it feels like a home because it's an extension of the kingdom, and I love that. That is something that I get to be a part of.
You know, to be the church is in every encounter and every opportunity. It's in every face that we get to see, because we don't always know that story or what's going on in that person's life.
This is where I'm supposed to be. This is my community. God has put me here for a reason, with a purpose, with a role to play. Yeah, this is where my people are. This is my home.
Church is not only for the healthy, it's for the sick as well.
He reminded me of who he is, who he was, and who he always will be.
God gave me new life, and Jesus provided me a new way of living.
What a great day to be together as the church. Today we are jumping in to a new series called We the Church. And we are so excited about this series because we believe that the church is not a place. We believe that church is a people, right? We believe that Port City Community Church is not a building. Hello? It's a people, a bunch of people who belong together, a bunch of crazy people, right? A bunch of people who are desperate for God, but who belong together. That's what we believe about the church. And if that's true, if we are the church, then that means that you play a critical and important role in who we are as the church and in who we are becoming as the church. And so today and the next 2 Sundays, we want to just kind of come around this idea, and we want to consider 3 things together, church. We want to consider, what is the state of our church? Like, where are we? We want to consider the weight of our church. Like, if we're a part of this, how should we feel about it? And then we want to consider the potential impact of our church and how you get to play a part in that potential impact of who we are and who we are becoming as a church. And so today, as we come around this idea of the state of our church, we're going to learn together in a slightly different way. You might notice 2 stools behind me, because today, instead of asking you to listen to a message, today we want to invite you into a conversation. Today we're going to have a conversation about where we are as a church, where we sense God taking us and moving us, and what it's going to require from us. I believe the conversation that you're going to get to hear and kind of listen in on and be a part of today, I believe it's going to be encouraging to you. I believe it's going to be helpful for you. I also believe it's going to be very compelling in your life. And so I would just ask for you to really to lean in, to pay attention. If you're a note taker, you're going to be able to take some notes today. If you brought a Bible with you, you can follow along in a couple of scriptures that we're going to be in. We're going to be in John 15, looking at a story that Jesus told. And we're going to be in Colossians 1, a prayer that Paul prayed for the church. And so I believe this is going to be powerful. And I'm really excited for the individual I get to bring up on stage to kind of lead through this conversation. This is someone who has made such a significant impact in my life, in my walk with Jesus, in my family. And I know this person has made such a huge impact in so many of us across Port City. And you probably are thinking you might know who this is. And so, church, I would love for you guys to help me welcome to the stage someone we love, someone who's impacted all of us, our very own senior pastor, Mr. Mike Ashcraft. Can I welcome Mike to the stage? Let's go, Mike. Come on, man. You should definitely expect that from me. So today we get to have a conversation.
Someone important.
Mike, that's you. You are important. We get to have a conversation with Mike, and this is one of the things that I love about Mike. Most of you probably know this, is that Mike gets excited about things. Have y'all ever seen Mike excited about something? Like whether it's the last trip he went on or the cookies he baked last night, he just gets really excited. But one of the things, Mike, I really do love about you, I'm being serious, is anytime I've ever seen you around on a Sunday when we've had baptisms, you get amped out of your mind. And if you've ever been baptized and you were backstage and you ran into Mike Ashcraft, you were like, wow, he is really, really excited about what's happening here. And so I just ask, can you let us into that? Like why, Mike, why do you get so excited about seeing and hearing baptisms and stories like what we got to witness today?
Even today, you're standing out there and, to hear one of the courage it takes for someone to share their story. Sure. You have an appreciation for, not an appreciation, that's too light of a word, but just it's a humility. It's like it's surreal. You can't believe this is what's happening with us. And, I think too, just having a perspective, you've been kind of leading through this and we've been talking about this just kind of going back in the very early days. And all these were dreams and hopes and things that I didn't even know were possible or I believed. And to kind of see it happen, like real time, and to think that and then at this point it is we. It's like not me, it's we, all the different parts and pieces that allow people to enter into our church and to connect with our church. And so it just is, it's surreal. And it just is, it's humbling, and it just makes you feel, overwhelmed that we get to bring hope and to mark a moment for someone that's going to stay and see their families down here, and to hear the church, like when Mandy says, you belong to us, like we belong together. You're like, oh my gosh, what is even happening here, And it just feels like that. And so it never, ever gets old. And I think too, one of the other things too is years ago, and I shared this story before, when the church was growing so fast and it was so chaotic, I think I almost lost the capacity to see a person. Right. Because I don't want to ever feel that way again. So everyone is a name, is a person, is a story. When they come out of that water, I want to high five them and thank them, and it's all that. So thank you. Thanks.
It's good, man. So we're talking about the state of our church, and I really am wanting to have you kind of lead us into what we've been sensing, or really what you've been sensing God doing in us. This is one of Mike's favorite questions to us as staff. It's like, hey, what's God doing? He'll just ask us. We're starting a meeting on something random and say, hey, what do you sense God doing? Like, what's happening? What are you sensing and seeing and feeling and believing God doing in us? So, Mike, you ask us this all the time. So I'd love just to turn the tables on you in front of everybody. And what have you been sensing? Like, what have you been seeing God doing in and through us as a church recently? Yeah,
the question is actually a ploy when you don't know what you're supposed to say or do. You just ask someone else what they're sensing, and then you kind of, that's what I'm sensing too. I'm just kidding. But it really is, and Clay, even like what we're experiencing here, and part of why this is so important for our church, even for you and I to be sitting here, and there are numbers of other voices. I mean, they're part of this. This is not, I don't operate, this is not how God has wired me. I don't go on a mountain, get a vision, come back down, and then go, here's what we're going to do. I believe in community. I believe in collaboration. I believe that we cooperate together and work together. So it is incredibly valuable to me to hear what God is sensing. Your voice, Mandy, Maddie, there's a host, Laura Lynn, Rick, there's a host of people that are constantly, we're learning and understanding this. And so I think when I think about this, there's a lot of sort of low-hanging fruit, not to be too cliche, that you can grab onto. But as I've thought about this, what I sense God doing in us, where we kind of are, is we are coming out of this season, or we're still in it, I would say, of ripening. And ripening is ripening is a really important word for us to get our heads and our hearts around. And I think it's an accurate description, because it's tempting to say, oh, we're going deeper in our walk. Mm-hmm. And there's a sign back here behind the stage, and it says, "Don't mistake trivia for depth." And a lot of people do. You think because you know more about God, or you've read more, or whatever, you've learned the songs, or whatever it is, you think that there's a depth. And don't get me wrong, depth is important. Intimacy is important. But ripening is actually, it's the process by which we become ready. We become ready. And I think that's what God has been doing in us over the last, I think it started probably somewhere around 2012, 13, 14. There was an exclamation point, Hurricane Florence.
Right.
18, and then the pandemic, I think, was just that place where you kind of dig, you get buried, and then it's just, it felt like scorching heat, but it was really, I think, the sun sort of preparing us for where we are going to go. So I love that idea, and I think that's important for it.
Yeah. Okay, so if you sense God ripening us, making us ready, how are you like seeing that? Like how are there specific places or ways that you see that in our church, like us becoming ready?
Yeah, if you've talked to me, and you have, but if you've talked to me at any length about where I'm kind of passionate about the church or where I feel like things are happening, is I'm over all the ways in which churches, the big church, whatever it is, measure their effectiveness or success, by how many people show up, how many people attend our programs, and you can entertain people, really easily and attract a crowd. That's actually not the hard thing to do. And so to find ways in which this has actually happened is far more difficult than just going, a lot of people showed up, a lot of people like this, we got a lot of likes on this.
Right.
What I've been looking for is a level of maturity. And what I'm seeing is kind of three things I wrote down. Number one is the conversations that I think we are entering into and having as a body. You can see this everywhere. We've been able, and we've talked about this from the very beginning of the racial tension that began in 2020, the pandemic, and all the other things that unfolded from there, was to be able to navigate the chaos faithfully without losing our minds. And the easy thing is to do whenever things don't go or aren't the way, you pull apart to the poles and you blast the talking points at the other side. And what we have been able to do, I feel like, is really navigate conversations with a level of depth. And like we talked about last week, to be able to submit ourselves to one another out of reverence for Christ and say, Lord, what are you doing? What are you asking of us in this season? And that's one way. The second way, I think that I'm hearing this, and again, some of this is internal for you, for those of you who are listening. We are not talking about how many people showed up in our programs very often anymore. We're talking about the meaningful connections that people are having with our church. That is a game changer. Because it means that we're not just about, it's not just numbers. It's about how are you being connected to us? How are we being connected to one another? And so we're starting to talk like that, to organize like that in our programs. You have to have programs, that's an important part, but they're actually serving all these other areas. And then last, I feel like that we have just become outward facing. I think that our community looks to us. We've got our Leland campus joining us. Leland does incredible work in Brunswick County. And it's just our almost default posture is now, how can we serve our city and our region and our world? Yeah. And I think that is a ripening. We're now, as the demands on the church and the need for the church, I think, is growing, I want us to be ready. Yeah. And I believe we are becoming that.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting. It didn't even hit me till just right now. And obviously, me and Mike have talked through this idea of what we're talking about today, but the idea of becoming ready. Like, I would say in the world probably doesn't value becoming ready.
No.
The world values success, numbers, matrix. And yet, for us as a church to say, hey, we want to become ready for something. Like, we want to be positioned for something. So it's like the conversations, the questions that we're asking, the connections that are being made, and then that perspective that we're gaining. It's like becoming ready for something for us as a people of God, as a church. That's super valuable. Yeah. But probably not something that we would all value in and of ourselves or in our culture. Yeah. And so if we're becoming ready, I guess the next question is like, where are we going, right? Like, if we sense that God's been doing this in us and getting us ready, it's ready for something. Yeah. And so I guess what I would love for you to share is like, what do you sense God doing in us or wants for us, or where is he taking us into kind of this next step of our church?
Yeah, I think the call for a church, for any church, in our church, is, and it kind of goes to the same theme, is to be fruitful. And, when you think about what fruit is or what fruit does or what it means for you and for me, There are so many places in the scriptures where it talks about this, and it's throughout. It talks about keeping consistency with the fruits of repentance. That we actually bear evidence that we have been forgiven.
Right.
And that we are returned to the way in which we have been intended to live. Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit. I believe, my personal view is it's a singular thing. The fruit of the Spirit is love because it's the image of God, and it's born out in patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control and this idea. So fruitfulness is not how much bigger we get or how many people. Fruitfulness is something that comes out of our lives in a really intimate way.
Yeah.
And so the other thing I think is interesting is that you can, fruit does two things, and we've tried to think about this over the years, but fruit does two things. Number one is it's evidence of identity. If you see an apple tree, or an apple, it's very likely it came from a what? An apple tree, right? It's evidence of identity.
That's so cool.
But there's also a beauty to it. I mean, it's incredible. Like these trees, when they did that, there's a beauty to it. The expression is beautiful, and it's purposeful. Yeah. And the second thing is that fruit always serves to nourish others. The fruit of my life, the fruit of your life, the fruit of our lives, the fruit of our church is designed. It is a beautiful expression of our identity, to make no mistake about it, and it should be beautiful. Yeah. But it is to nourish the world around us, to bring something that the world desperately is hungry for through how we live our lives and how we are as a church.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple years ago, my one word was planted.
Oh, yeah.
And it was one of my favorite words, and it comes from Psalm chapter 1. It talks about the blessed man is the one who doesn't, sit in this, with scoffers or walk with sinners, but on God's law, on God's word, he meditates day and night. And then it says that he is like a tree planted by streams of living water, and it bears fruit in its season. And my focus was me being planted. Like I wanted to be planted. And part of it was like, I think the season of life where there was a lot of change and transition. So it was like this desire just to be kind of rooted and planted, but also knowing that I needed to be rooted and planted like in God. But the focus quickly changed for me from being planted to being fruitful, right? So I love that passage. And you do see this idea of fruit all throughout the story of Scripture. John 15 is one that I'd love for us to look at, and we'll have the text on the screen, but John 15 is where Jesus it's his day before he's crucified. So we're coming up to Easter pretty quickly, and this is kind of this last moment for him and his disciples, and he is teaching them. He's sharing communion with them. He is washing their feet, and they're walking out probably from that place of the Last Supper to the Garden of Gethsemane, and he tells a story. And I just would love to read this over us. And then, Mike, I'd love to hear you kind of pull this out and this idea of being fruitful. But in John 15, starting in verse 1, Jesus says this. He says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser." So just imagine Jesus walking with his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's walking past some vineyards because there's grapes everywhere, right? And he said, "I'm the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser." He says, "Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit." Verse 3, "Although already you are clean because of the word that I've spoken to you, abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me." Verse 5, "I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me, and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing." It's amazing. I mean, I think we focus a lot on being the branch and Jesus being the vine, but he really is focused on this fruit that we're going to produce in our life.
Yeah. And I think when you think about this, even when we think about abiding, it feels very personal and very soft. It's like I'm just gonna kind of
sweet.
mushy. It's very sweet. I'm gonna, And there is a tenacity, and it's interesting because what Jesus is addressing is that he does prune. Like to remain in him is going to mean that things that we value or that are a part of us are sometimes cut away in order for other things to be produced. I will tell you personally, there are lots is too dramatic. There are several things that I thought that I wanted desperately, or if this were to happen, this would be the way forward. And those things, they died.
Yeah.
Larry Crabb wrote a book years ago called Shattered Dreams, and he says sometimes our good dreams have to give way in order for better dreams to emerge. And that has been the case of my own personal journey with the church. But I think when I think about what we need and what's happening in the church, the idea of abiding isn't just you doing your quiet time, although you should, and you should also keep a journal, right?
Right.
Sorry. But there's a tenacity to it. It's a commitment. It's a willingness to stay and to remain.
Yeah.
In our culture, I don't know if you realize this or not, people basically, there's a life cycle. As long as we're entertained, everything is fine. As soon as we stop being entertained, we start looking for something new. What happens is what something new often feels like is deeper or more nuanced, and it's not, it's just new. And that too will wear out if we don't learn how to stay in. Part of what my concern, I've been here 22 years. It's a long time. I know a lot of things and a lot of people. People say, let me tell you what's wrong with the Port City Church. I'm like, man, I got a list a lot longer than you. I've been here. I know all the crazy stuff about it. But it's the willingness to endure and to stay in something and to stay in something together that really allows us to experience the kind of fruitfulness that I think God has for us. And that's really what excites me about the future of the church.
Yeah. It's just so interesting, like even in this passage where I focus on not wanting to be cut away or I'm worried about being pruned. Is it going to hurt? Yeah. Or I'm just simply, even like in a really beautiful place of, I'm just wanting to like abide.
Yeah.
That over and over, the goal is
fruitfulness.
And I always thought about it, I'll be honest, for so long I thought my fruit is like, it's like my good works. Like, so that people would see me and be like, oh, he's obviously, he's a good Christian.
Yep.
And to think about the fact that my fruit or fruit from my life, it's not for me, it's for others.
Nourishes, yeah.
It nourishes other people. To me, it just shifts the passage and it shifts my mindset because, I think in the busyness of life and the pressure of life and even the pressure of trying to be a follower of Jesus, I think for a lot of us, we're just trying to like hang on, and hanging on is required.
Right.
But hanging on for what? It's to grow, yes, like to grow in my walk, to grow in my relationship with Jesus, but to grow in such a way that I have something to offer somebody else, that I can be fruitful, that you can be fruitful. And it's not just the pastors or the leaders of the church who are called to be fruitful, it's all of us. Like, we're all called to be fruitful in our life. And what's beautiful is the pressure's off because we can't be fruitful on our own. But when we abide in Jesus, when we allow him to be our source, we can bear much fruit, is what it says.
Yeah.
Much fruit. So I love that. So that's where we're going, is like we are being ripened, but what we are saying is, man, God's leading us to be fruitful for other people. And so I guess the last thing for us is like, well, then what does it require of us?
Right.
Like, for me, for everyone in the seats, for everyone online, for everyone in Leland, like, what is it going to take for us to become that kind of people, a fruitful people?
Yeah.
And I want to hear from you, like, as our senior pastor, like, what's it going to take from us?
Yeah. It is the remain. It's to be committed. Like, we have to develop and not commitment to, Port City Church or Mike, but a commitment to Christ as our King and his body. And there is a specific, we talk about we're never going to be Port City centric. We don't ever want, we do a lot of stuff, we don't ever try to like plaster. We don't want to be Port City centric, but we are Port City specific. We have a pastoral responsibility for our church and for one another. That's a lot of what these last few years have been about, really taking seriously the pastoral responsibility that we have been given and that we have received, for our church and for one another. I feel before the Lord that I am responsible for our congregation, also responsible to our congregation. Like there's a mutuality to it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we were talking about, and this is sort of the prayer that I want to read to you, and then we'll just kind of talk about it. And this is really what I think is how or what's required of us. But this prayer actually comes from Colossians chapter 1. I actually brought this, Clay, because this is, you don't know if you can see this very well. This was written in 1999, and this is the version that was printed in 2001. And this prayer was where our mission came from, to reach people and help them walk with God.
Oh, wow.
And I remember I was actually looking back through my journals this morning, and I remember praying this prayer and knowing that I'm serious. Like, Lord, I'm serious about this prayer. Like, I'm feeling this. I'm praying this prayer, like, for our church. And there's literally 15 people that includes. But I remember just saying, Lord, could you help me to awaken me to that? And that's like when you ask about baptisms, that's a lot of what it's like. That's what it reminds me, that kind of full circle of, man, this is what I wanted. This is what I hoped for. So this is what Colossians chapter 1 says. And Paul says, so from the day we've heard about their faith, is what he's talking about, we have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, right? So that you may walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. And that's even morphed over the years, right? Walking in a manner worthy of the Lord just like goes, let us be well behaved so that people see us and go, oh yeah, those are good Christian people. Instead of no, we walk in a manner worthy of the Lord because we are his image bearers. We've been created to bear and reflect his image and his love to the world, fully pleasing to him by our faith, by our willingness to trust, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. And then it says this, being strengthened with all power, which I love. If I was being strengthened with all the power of God, we would wipe out anybody who stands in our way. And then he goes on and says, that's not what I'm talking about. Slow your roll. Being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might. And if you just pause right there and you say, what would you do with God's glorious might? Like, what would you do with God's glorious might? No more traffic? Financial problems solved? Yeah. Like, my list seems to be very different than his. He says, I'm strengthening you with my glorious might. Here's why. For all endurance and for patience with joy. The reason he's dividing, the reason we have to stay connected, because ripening and bearing fruit is a long haul solution. We've been saying this for 5 years, maybe longer, but certainly since very intentionally the last 2, that we cannot buy into thinking that our circumstances are going to be the source of our lives and our joy. The world is, we feel this today. I was just up in Missouri this past weekend with our partners, Convoy of Hope. And man, they are on the front lines living the reality that the church is the advancement of all these things that are happening in the worst of the situations. And it's because there's a readiness in those places. And that's when we're talking about being strengthened, it's so that we will have endurance. So we'll be able to stand and stay in this when you want to quit. To be patient is long-suffering or forbearance. It's like putting up with others and circumstances when they're not the way that we ought to be. And this is where God's strength is found to be sufficient. And so I think this is what we need. We have spent a lot of time, and listen, God loves us. He's for us. He blesses us. All those things are true. But his strength for us is in order for us to endure, to remain faithful, because what you have and what we have is actually a nourishing and hope-giving force to the world. Yeah. Not only that, it's a hope-giving, life-giving source to you. There are people in this room and gathered with us who what you need is you need care of this body. You need someone to shoulder your burden and to enter into your pain. And we get to do that for one another. That's what I mean by pastoral responsibility. It's for us to enter in, not just to try to, soundbite and give you cool nuggets to take. It's for us to enter into this together in a really personal way, in a meaningful way that actually supports the weight of your grief or your struggle or your story. And then out of that, when we remain in that, and we stay in that, God strengthens us with endurance and patience. And it just, we become, right? We become an apple because we're connected to, right? We're an apple tree. We become the thing that God has made us to be. Yeah. And so what I would just say is you got to get this, in our minds and our hearts that His strength in your life and in my life is for the purpose of endurance and patience with joy. It means there's no circumstance that can rob or threaten what He brings to us. Y'all, that's what I need, that's what our world needs. We are brokers, of that kind of hope. Wow. So it just makes me so excited.
Wow. So in order to remain, we need strength.
Yep.
Through the strength that God provides, we are enabled to endure, which is what provides the space and a runway for us to be fruitful for others. And then it also allows us to be patient because others ain't easy.
Yeah,
right?
No, right. Let me interject one more thing. Think about this, and you maybe think this in your own life or in your world, in your job. I assume everybody here has a moment when you've wanted to quit or give up, right, on something? No? Just me and you, Clay. We're the only ones. Yeah. What I have found, and listen, what I have found is when I push through those moments, that's usually where the most beautiful things are actually found. When I don't quit or don't give up or don't give in. Yeah. And this is not a ploy to go stay at Port City Church. I'm just saying there are lots of reasons why people go, I think I'm like, what if you push through and you find something and you remain and you stay in a particular way that actually bears the kind of fruit that God wants us to produce. I've been doing this for 22 years. And we used to say this in the beginning, that the church is the hope of the world. And I believed it. And 22 years into this, I believe it more deeply than I ever have before. And the reasons are profoundly different than they were in the beginning.
Yeah. Wow. So where we are is that God is ripening us for what? It's for fruitfulness, to be nourishing for others, and what it's going to require of us is to remain, which we need strength, endurance, and patience. I think if I'm receiving that today, like to me, that's a beautiful picture. It might not be the picture I came in the room with, but it's a beautiful picture because of what we get to do for each other. And you said that, like when we think of the world, and that's part of our vision is life with God together for the world. And sometimes when I think of the world, I think of like another continent, but it's like, what about the world around you? Like in the place that you live. What about the world around you in the seat that you sit in today? And Mike, you said this when we were talking at one point, so I wrote it down, so I'm quoting Mike here, so this is not me. But what you said is that this is going to happen. This ripening, this readiness, this fruitfulness is going to happen not because of great preaching. Now, you said that.
I didn't mean that.
Yeah. It's not going to happen through great preaching or programs, but because we have been shaped by Jesus in the context of imperfect community. That's us, imperfect community. And it's going to be expressed through us in shepherding each other, caring for each other, nourishing each other, being the fruit that each other needs right here, right now, as we continue to grow and walk with Jesus and follow Him in our lives. And that's a beautiful, compelling picture for us as Port City Community Church.
It actually is the gospel.
Yeah.
Jesus made His kingdom available, right? When that's what He came to do. And He does that still through His body at work in this world. Yeah. And every simple act of faith and love and offering, brings that.
Yeah.
Renewal and redemption.
And we get to be a part of that.
We get to be a part of it.
And so I think that's what we're saying, like we're invited into this. This is what it looks like for us to be the church. This is we the church. And for it to happen, man, we need God. Like he is our source. And he is our strength. And so, Paul prayed for the churches that he planted and led. He prayed those things over them. And so I just think no better fitting way than, Mike, would you pray over us? Like I know a lot, at the end of your message you pray, but like, would you just specifically pray for us that we would remain, that we would continue to ripen, and that we would actually bear fruit in every season for this church?
The honor, yeah. Father, we confess that you are the vine and we are branches. If we remain in you, you remain in us, then we will bear much fruit. But apart from that, we'll only entertain and we won't do anything according to your words. So, Father, my prayer for our church is that we would walk in a manner worthy of you, that we would be filled with all the knowledge and spiritual understanding and wisdom as individuals and then collectively. God, that we would be pleasing in every respect, bearing fruit in every single activity of our lives. That we would grow up into you who is the head. Every part joined and fitted together as the body builds itself up in love. Father, you have a vision and an intention for this church, for our church. You've invited us to be a part of it. So, Father, I ask that you would continue to show us and reveal to us and strengthen us. Father, I pray blessings over our congregation, protection and provision, that the joy that you give, no circumstance could steal. For those struggling, I pray for support and community. For those who are on the other side of that, Father, we celebrate and we offer ourselves to you and to one another to be encouragement, to be encouraging as you continue to use us to be and to bring hope to our city, our region, and our world that desperately needs it. I lift all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus, who we confess as our King. Amen.